Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar, and once again, this is my opinion, and we are continuing the Everybody Loves Raymond reviews. Now we are on The Pessimist, which, once again, is a very fitting title because this episode deals with pessimism versus optimism, mainly in the form of Ray himself. The driving force behind this conflict is that he has been nominated for Sportswriter of the Year, which in his line of work, great award. I can only think of a couple of awards for someone who writes in a paper that would be bigger, like a Pulitzer and maybe the Nobel Prize. Might be one or two others, but those are the two big ones that I could think of. That'd be like, oh, it's like, you're getting Sports Writer of the Year. You're also up for a Pulitzer and the Nobel Prize. Of course, if Ray got nominated for those two as well, based on how he reacts here, he'd probably be like, now, once he hears that he's nominated, Ray is like, I'm not going. I don't want to go. And when Debra confronts him about it, he's like, if I go, that means I want it. And my whole expectation is going to change. Right now, I'm just like right here. If I fall, it's a sprained ankle. I walk away. And Debra confronts him about it. It's like, you're such a pessimist, Ray. And she eventually talks him into going, and Ray does win. Congratulations for Ray. He wins Sports Writer of the Year. Of course, the way Debra frames it is that no duh, you're going to win. Because one of the other ones already won twice, so he's done, which is like, okay, I get you're trying to cheer up Ray, but that's kind of dismissive. I mean, you can win awards multiple times like that. I mean, in certain categories, it's rare to win multiple ones back to back. I mean, just look at the Academy Awards. Not that many people have won more than 3. I mean, the only other big thing like that is you can see was Meryl Streep's multiple nominations. I mean, she's the queen of nominations, but hardly winning. And then, of course, with that, we get the little meta in-joke mentioning her father, Chuck Heaton, who is a sports writer, and that his big story that year was too much violence in boxing, which I happen to agree with Debra here. Like, thanks for the scoop, Chuck. It's like, too much violence in boxing. You don't say. A sport where two people in shorts with gloves go to punch each other. There's too much violence in it. Truly, Chuck, you are a masterful reviewer and a masterful sports writer to give us such riveting news that we could not tell with our own eyes. Then again, this is also during the same decade where certain state governments called MMA human cockfighting, so it is what it is. After Ray takes the award home is when Debra really confronts him about his pessimistic behavior, telling him it's negative, you gotta improve on it. He's like, no, I don't want to. But he eventually relents and decides to. And you can tell when Ray is starting to act a little bit more optimistic that it is not his go-to emotional behavior. I mean, he's trying to do his best, but there is a little weirdness about him. And I have to say that this is where this episode taking place in the first season works to that advantage. That's an advantage for it. Because since this is when Ray was still getting used to normal acting, I mean, he's still decent, but not as good as he would be later when it became more natural. Here he still has that little awkwardness. That works for when he's trying to be an optimist. Because he channeled that awkwardness into his performance. And as he's trying to be an optimist, he just takes it even further when he reveals he gets a promotion, tells everyone he's trying to be all happy, and it goes from being an optimist to him coming across as a braggart, which I don't really agree with Frank and Marie a whole lot when it comes to them downplaying others' accomplishments or going into their whole negative or weird mindset. But this is one of the few times where I partially agree with that, and that's when Frank points out no one likes a bragger. But I'd say that's because Ray took the whole optimist thing and went a little bit too far in the opposite direction. I mean, I do agree with Ray, he shouldn't be apologizing. He should be saying, alright, I'll tone it down. But he shouldn't be apologizing for trying to think it's good. That he doesn't want to be a pessimist like his family. Because, as we see in this episode, they really are pessimistic. I mean, it's shown at the beginning of the episode when we find out that Robert also got an award around this time. It's a little bit less important, but it's there. He got a condemnation. Oh, that's what Frank calls it. A commendation for perfect attendance for 3 years in a row, which is pretty good. Of course, it is quickly forgotten once Ray announces his nomination for Sportswriter of the Year. And the way they set this up is good, because then Frank and Marie really, they step away from Robert. They're like, hey, and they walk over to Ray. And I have to say, if there's any better way to show the relationship between Ray and Robert when it comes to how their parents view them and the scale of importance, I can't think of a better one. It's like, hey, walk over to him. And Robert be like, no. Of course, getting a promotion for winning Sportswriter of the Year is pretty good, and his parents are happy about that, but they seem to downplay it once they find out he wasn't made editor. He's made of head of sports features, which, based on that title, I'm assuming Ray is now in charge of the entire paper's sports division, which means every other sports writer works under him, which, given he won that big award, it makes sense, and combined with his tenure, he's the perfect person to have that position. They never really mentioned that position again after this episode. They still mention his column, so I'm assuming that in addition to writing the column, he has that responsibility. Makes me wonder what the pay increase would be. Of course, Frank also downplays it by saying, oh, the Sportswriter Hall of Fame, no, it's just of the year. It's like, oh, yeah, of the year. And of course, Frank also downplays it when he finds out that it's only the trophy, no cash or anything. And he tries to downplay it further by going, oh, you take that prestige to the bank and see how much eggs you bring home. Which, given Frank's personality and how he deals with things, you understand why that would be his view. But at the same time, they're right. The prestige in your field, just to win an award like this, very prestigious. I mean, no matter what your field, if you win an award that's big like this, it's very prestigious. Whether you're an actor when it comes to the Golden Globes or the Oscars, musician when it comes to the Grammys, any other field or award, winning it brings a lot of prestige. But I have to agree with Debra's earlier statement in the episode that just being nominated alone is an achievement, especially your first nomination, especially when factored in with who is also nominated. I'm going to use acting and writing again here as an example. More so writing. Just being nominated, you'd be like, oh, great. But let's just say for the sake of the argument, you're being nominated for literature, and the people around you were writers like Neil Gaiman, George R. R. Martin, Stephen King. Win or lose in that thing, it's good to be even in consideration with those greats. And I can tell you, if I was nominated alongside them, I'd be like, oh, just to be in the same conversation with them, it'd be like, that means I made it. But then to win the award on top of it, it'd be like, oh my God. And then, of course, with an acting thing, let's say you're nominated for Best Actor alongside people, let's say you're nominated alongside De Niro, Nicholson, McConaughey, other greats from around this time. You'd be like, oh, great. That means I'm in the, when people mention this year or mention films that got Best Actor, I'm in the conversation. And of course, even going one step with director, let's say you're nominated alongside people like Tarantino and Nolan. Win, lose, or draw there, it's like just great to be nominated. So the fact that Ray downplays that, it still has me shaking my head. More so as an adult. It's one of the things that really has grown as an adult. But maybe that's the optimist in me. Although I'm an optimist that views things as hope for the best, expect the worst. Which I think might be the better definition of a realist than what Ray gives. But a realist might also not care one way or another. And of course, a pessimist would be like, that's probably going to be negative, but if it goes positive, alright. Of course, with Ray, he's a super pessimist because of that scene where Debra does word association and every word he comes up with is a negative. Although he tries to spin twins being a positive one, which that scene is pretty funny. Makes me wonder if all those reactions were scripted or if a couple were ad-libs, just to see what Ray would come up with. I'd say it's scripted because it doesn't have that same flair that a lot of his ad-libs, especially around this time, have. Now, of course, in true Ray fashion, his whole pessimistic viewpoint is shown to be partially right by the end of the episode because, as the new head of sports features, the people in charge of the paper want Ray to go cover a big sporting event happening around this time, and guess what it is? It's the Iditarod, that big race up in Alaska. They really want him to do it this year because there's a girl from Long Island competing in it. And Ray, the moment he hears that, he's like, I'm a pessimist, this is where I belong. And to go with it, the last scene, the epilogue, It shows him calling home from Alaska. And then his lips get stuck to the phone when he tries to kiss Debra goodbye. I mean, it's an obvious set for this thing, but it fits the whole thing because it is a sitcom, and it is funny to see Ray get, I wouldn't say karma, but it's like, they kissed the phone in cold weather. That's bound to happen, Ray. You should know that. It's not just a little joke for films. I mean, some films probably do play it up a bit, but it does happen. I mean, cold object, warm skin. Like a lot of other episodes from season 1, this episode does contain cameos from famous sports figures. Unlike the others, which take place in the prologues, this one is actually in the meat of the episode. It's during the awards ceremony, where we got Marv Albert, who is the master of ceremonies, who does have a little short conversation with Ray. And then we got Katarina Witt, who is a famous skater, who, in the canon of the show, is a big fan of Ray's work, and tells him she hopes he wins that night. Their conversation is a little awkward, but that goes with Ray's whole pessimistic thing. Debra trying to cheer him up and then coming across weird, and Ray trying to brush it off though she's on medication, which is funny. It just goes with Ray trying to downplay everything. But that's how Ray is, especially in this episode. Acting-wise, pretty good. Like I mentioned, Ray already, his slight awkwardness from this early in the show does help when he's trying to act super optimistic. He only has a couple moments. Brad Garrett's good for what he has to do, especially the big pity party he does at the beginning. 1,095 days of perfect attendance. Peter Boyle, Doris Roberts, good for what little they have to do. Not really a whole lot other than playing the negative parents. And Peter, I think, has a little bit more to do because of his whole shtick of trying to downplay the award thing for just being prestigious. Just the way he delivers his lines in that scene, like the aforementioned how many eggs you bring home moment. Other than Ray, it is Patricia Heaton who really carries this episode. Her trying to pull Ray up, her succeeding for a bit, and then reality coming crashing down and it falling back down and him ignoring anything she says. And those two, this episode really does show that they do have a good chemistry as husband and wife, and they're very believable. I mean, I don't think we'd ever see them in another show or movie together playing spouses, but it would be interesting to see them play spouses again now that they're older, more experienced. More so for Ray, because Patricia was already a pro at this point. And even if they don't play spouses, it'd be nice to see them acting alongside each other again. Of course, because of some things in Patricia's real life that might not happen. I'm not going to address it in this review series, but if you know anything about it, you should know. On the whole, The Pessimist is a pretty fun episode. Has a nice little conflict for Ray and Debra to get around. It really does show that his family can be super negative at times, sometimes at the detriment of Ray and or Robert, which of course by this point in the series is a fact that we all know, but this one really shows it. There's a couple other episodes that deal with this topic, one of which is in season 2, and that one it really wants. If there's any times that Ray is very sympathetic and his parents deserve a big smack, it's in that episode, but I'll get to that when I get to that. Fun episode, nice little conflict, nice little end, and some interesting cameos in the heart of the story. That concludes my review of The Pessimist. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for future content. We got 4 episodes left in season 1, and the next one coming up is actually one of my favorite of the season, and it's the introduction of a minor character of the canine variety that would be in the Barones' lives up until the end of season 3, and he is named after a very famous baseball player.